The first payment system that I'd like to discuss today is gifting, in which we give away any excess production that we might have in hope of some kind of reciprocal generosity from the recipient. In general, hope in this regard is not necessarily as scary as it might sound as a strategy, because in general, we have built up socially the notion that gifting has a reciprocity associated with it. There is, in fact, a lot of ritualized gift giving in various human civilizations, whether it's weddings, birthdays, simply visiting, people coming by for dinner, etc. The notion is to bring something to the host or to bring something to the celebrant in order to demonstrate our affiliation to them, our willingness to give freely, perhaps even without the expectation of reciprocation. And so gifts are usually only made between people who have such kinds of bonds in the first place, mostly because there is a very significant cost associated with gifting to strangers who fail to reciprocate. This type of gifting between affiliates helps to fortify the cohesion of various kinds of social groups, what famous Arab historian Ibn Khaldun called the asbiya in his book Muqaddimah, which had to do with social cohesion and the notion that societies will rise and fall over time based on their degree of social cohesion. So it's important for us to understand that gifting is not really just about the transmission of capital, or at least not just the transmission of physical assets, but also comes with a very powerful social layer in which we transmit our intentions about future actions, or in which we signal the strength of our affiliation through the kinds of gifts that we provide. Now, gifting is a celebrated and ritualized part of many different kinds of societies. For instance, in Canada, we had the potlatch ceremonies, which was very popular among the Northwestern First Nations in Canada. We can see here we have a decent image of a potlatch actually from 1983. The potlatch ceremony was originally banned in Canada going back to 1885 as the government tried to force assimilation onto First Nations people and attempted to break the bonds of affiliation that they had with their own communities in order to encourage them to adopt the dominant culture of the day. The prohibition, unfortunately, I am ashamed to say, was not lifted until 1951, rather. And here we can see an image of people preparing for potlatch in Canada in 1983, after, of course, the legality of the tradition was reestablished. But there are a number of other important kinds of gifting ceremonies. For instance, if you explore some of the links down here, you'll see that there is a very popular form of gifting exchange in Papua New Guinea. The link there is to a documentary that was created in the 80s called Onka's Big Moka. In the Big Moka, Onka, who is the leader of his people, attempts to earn a particular favor of another powerful tribe by providing great gifts. The Moka Exchange is one in which various tribes provide gifts to one another with the intent of trying to earn favor from them. And in fact, at one point, after Onka gifts a truck to the neighboring tribe in an important attempt to establish favor between the two, he says quite clearly in the documentary, "I have won. I have knocked you down by giving so much." So it gives you some idea that there is very powerful value creation that is expected to flow in the opposite direction from gifts, that there is to some extent an exchange which is happening, even if it's only a matter of social capital in exchange for physical goods. But of course, these kinds of gifting economies do run into problems. If we take a look at the last link on the bottom here, you'll see the economy of Burning Man runs into this kind of problem all the time. In fact, the title of this blog entry was that the gift economy isn't an economy at all, but that's no excuse for your terrible gift. The problem was that they had people showing up at a festival where you were not allowed to use money for exchange and offering things like, for lack of a better description, crappy glass beads in exchange for things like prepared meals and shelter. And as a result, with people not providing gifts of equivalent value or even remotely equivalent value, where they're obviously attempting to free ride on the social system, it actually ends up undermining the entire notion of a gift economy and poisoning the well for others who might be able to take advantage of it. Now, of course, there are significant advantages to using gifts. One of the particular advantages is that gifts can be personalized, which can, of course, raise the value for the recipient above the cost to the giver. You might be able to locate a particular item that I have not been able to find myself. It might only cost you $20, but I might value it at $40 or $50 or $100 depending on its rarity, regardless of the price that you had to pay. And so thoughtful gifts that reflect the preferences of the receiver are often valued more highly necessarily than their ticket price, because there is, again, that social signal that I think highly of you and that I am aware of what your preference structure is. So I tried to carefully select these goods. Similarly, we've seen people try to use gifting, even when it's not directly reciprocated or in response to a prior gift, in order to establish a bond of affiliation. We see this, for instance, when dating couples who are in the act of courting might show up with flowers, for instance. I realize that's probably a century-old notion, but you have the same sort of idea that happens historically when weaker states provide tributes or gifts to other powerful sovereigns in exchange for their protection. So this notion of gift giving is very deeply embedded in almost all human cultures to some extent. And in fact, there are certain kinds of transactions which simply can't take place outside of gifting. As a very simple couple of examples, imagine trying to pay your friends to help you move to a new apartment. It might generally be rejected by your friends on the basis that it seems impersonal for you to pay them each $20. But if you buy them $20 worth of beer and pizza, they'll probably help you. Similarly, we see it as very acceptable to say, buy your mother flowers for Mother's Day. But it would be unacceptable to hand her a cash equivalent and tell her to buy her own flowers because she knows what she likes. Now, of course, there are inefficiencies associated with gifting, because even though a well thought out gift can create effectively more value than its ticket price, a poorly thought out gift can create a deadweight loss in society, whereby the gift is valued at less than its ticket price, making the act of gifting a deadweight loss effectively, where economic value is squandered. Gifting also suffers, of course, from the possibility of default risk, as I was suggesting with the Burning Man blog, where gifting things to people does not necessarily create any kind of legal obligation for reciprocity. It might create a social obligation, but those are generally much harder to enforce. Another problem is the illiquidity of gifting. If I've gifted something to you and I require something back from you in the future, I might not be in a position to demand that you repay me in kind at a particular point in time. So gifting is fundamentally illiquid compared to other kinds of, you might say, assets. A social asset that I provided you a gift so I can hope for reciprocity in the future does not necessarily translate into me being able to command the timing or the form of that reciprocity. Finally, you have to remember that gifting only allows for coordination in general between affiliates and doesn't work particularly well when we're dealing with strangers or non-affiliates because of the default risk that's associated with it. And finally, we have to consider the possibility that reciprocity is very heavily socially enforced and that one-upping effectively could take place. There's a link in the slide deck that I'd encourage you to have a look at. It has a story from The Economist that was published in 2013 regarding families in rural China who had taken a habit of gifting to one another in their villages as various occasions like weddings, funerals, and birthdays took place. The problem was that there was an expectation built in that gifts would be at least as good as the gift that you had given, which meant, of course, that there was an escalation of commitment between gift givers. And it got to the point where certain people had to drop out of attending weddings and funerals simply because they could not afford the necessary gifts that would otherwise be socially required of them.